Tonight on the Tim Barry Show, we have a man who has just published a new work on the history of American genetic thought entitled An Evolutionary Thought. He shares a name with one of the great African American orators. Please welcome Dr. Fred Douglass.
Thank you for having me on the show, Tim.
Well, thank you for being here, Doctor. Now tell me, what was the inspiration for this book?
Well, it all started after I dove back into a college commencement speech by Frederick Douglass back in 1854 entitled The Claims of the Negro Ethnologically Considered. He had this truly powerful discourse on the nature of human development.
I see. Bit of a coincidence in the naming there, isn't it? So what led him to make this speech?
Well, you see, Tim, it was in response to a book published that same year entitled Types of Mankind by one Josiah Nott and George Glidden that spoke about the evolutionary development of the human race.
What did the book discuss, exactly?
Well, to be honest, it wasn't the most egalitarian of scientific discussions. It basically discussed humanity as separate species and that certain kinds are genetically superior to others.
Well, that's a cheery subject.
You have no idea. It was really popular among Southern planters and aristocrats, as you could probably imagine. They used it to justify the practice of slavery.
Ah, I see. So essentially that book was in and of itself racist science?
Not too far from the truth. But the real crux of this was, according to another scientist named John Bachman, was that all of this was incredibly false.
So this John Bachman completely proved those two wrong?
Yes, he did. And it was John Bachman that inspired Frederick Douglass to make such a stand in his address.
Well, that's interesting. So what was the shared sentiment between Mr. Bachman and Mr. Douglass?
They shared an assumption that people's lifestyles and upbringing determined how they developed later in life, and that there was no major genetic differences between the human race. Essentially, that the ideas placed in Types of Mankind were completely false. He also referred to a trip he took to Ireland one year where he saw Irishmen, who according to Types of Mankind would have been completely superior to the African slaves in the United States, but for the most part, especially for the farm workers, they were in the exact same condition, which was a physical example of Nott and Glidden being wrong.
So this speech was his little way of putting out these less discriminatory scientific findings into the public view.
You could say that, yes. I also think it was specifically aimed to target the sentiment that this science, because of its racist undertones, could not be considered as true by rational scientists.
It seems like the general thought process here was to prove Nott and Glidden wrong and at the same time inspire the students he was speaking to.
I would have to agree with that point of view. I also get the sense that the general message was that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant and that what you do with your life determines who you are.
Well, that is a truly inspiring statement. Thank you for coming on to the show tonight, Fred.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
This has been Fred Douglass and the book is An Evolutionary Thought. This has been the Tim Barry Show. Thank you and good night.